Hello, my name is Karin Svensson. I am the producer of the podcast Nobel Prize Conversations. And I'm here with Anna Blennow, Associate Professor of Latin at the University of Gothenburg, and also an essayist and literary critic. And you've headed a study about the history of guidebooks, and with a special focus on the city of Rome. And who better to ask the question, what fascinates us about cities?
Yes, what is so fascinating about cities? I think that it basically is about that we as human beings, we want to be together. We want to meet, we want to stay together. The Greek philosopher Aristotle said that someone who could live without any form of society is either a god or a wild beast. I think that is rather true. But somehow it is also about this aspect that the city is a place where the lights never go out. A city never sleeps. So cities are eternal in so many ways. And then we human beings who live in cities, we then must be immortal. I think that that is also an aspect that draws us to cities.
But what kind of cities do we want to experience? What is the image in our mind of what a city is?
Studying historical guidebooks and ancient city descriptions can tell us a lot about which kinds of cities that have fascinated people over time. And ideal cities are described as economically and politically powerful, of course. Then we have also trading cities with rich import and export, and thereby connected with all of the known world. That is also something often praised in city descriptions. So what remains then for cities less powerful or less influential, for example, the cities around the Mediterranean at the time of Rome's domination? Well, it is to be harmlessly beautiful and charmingly picturesque. That is the salvation for the less powerful cities. But then also, of course, as in the case of Rome, the historical richness of a city is something that always have been deemed worthy of praise. And one shall not forget the inhabitants, the population of a city, which is something that is very often put forward in ancient city descriptions as really the most beautiful thing about a city.
But everyone who's ever traveled has had the experience of disappointment when coming to a city. Why is that?
Yes, why do we get disappointed when we travel? Because we do, all of the time, actually. And that is something that guidebooks are rather silent about, because the guidebooks want us to believe that whatever will happen, we will be totally safe when we have the guidebook. But that has to do with images of cities, the imagination, the expectations that are formed and produced by guidebooks and city descriptions. They build images, and these images build dreams. But these images can also be of hindrance to a visitor, when the visitor won't find what he or she expects to find in a city. Love in Paris, history in Rome, culture in Berlin, or whatever. So that is the problem of when the ideal and the real meet, which is what often happens when we travel.
But that sounds like you'd actually want to experience a city without reading a guidebook. But would we get along without them, you think?
Sorry?
If we hadn't guidebooks, what kind of experience would we have of cities?
If we hadn't guidebooks, well, the guidebooks would answer, you must have guidebooks, because the guidebook paves the way through the city, explains the enigmas of the city. The guidebook really is the city. packed in a neat portable pocket format. But I think that what happens now in our time is that perhaps we are less dependent on guidebooks because we now have internet and our smartphones, but we also tend to trust perhaps more and more again our friends. We ask for advice on social media when we are going somewhere. We trust advice of others, and that is actually a very kind of historical way to act. The book is a rather modern phenomenon. But even if perhaps guidebooks as books are a bit less used now than historically, books are about learning, and travel will always still be about learning. You have to learn when you travel, in whatever way that is. You have to learn languages to understand new places. But at the same time, traveling is also learning. So traveling and learning will always go together.
Can you tell me a little bit about that specific book? Because it was very central to the study.
Yes, this is the most typical guidebook ever produced. The German Baedeker series began to be published in Germany in the mid-19th century and soon became the standard guidebook, really, for almost a century after that. But it is really, this is a product of the 19th century, the growing want to travel, to learn. More and more people could travel. The railway made it possible. And it's so packed with information. It's so totally detailed. This is really the protection of a traveler. So, I mean, after the Baedeker series, guidebooks never became this detailed again. So this was once in history, but it was also produced in a time when travelers still wanted to be protected when they traveled. They wanted to stay at hotels where they had countrymen. They didn't want to interact with the locals, and the guidebook would protect them from that, which is something that I think luckily has changed with the 20th century. Now travelers want to interact with the locals. They want to mingle with them. They want to do what the locals do.
But what other differences are there between the way we viewed cities in antiquity and now, compared to now?
I hear a bit.
What other differences can we talk about that's besides from wanting to be safe in the way we view cities now compared to the way they viewed them in antiquity?
Yes, because the identity and needs of travelers have, of course, obviously changed throughout history. And how do we experience cities now, and how did people do it then? And historically, it was very much about the role of the city in the learning and education of the individual, as during the Grand Tour era, for example. But now, during perhaps the second half of the 20th century, something happened with the image of the city, the role of the city, into something more focused on consuming cities, with top 10 lists of bars, restaurants, shopping streets, and so on. So the city became something that could and should be consumed. And of course, travelers have always consumed cities when traveling, but historically more focused on cultural experiences than on the a bit more superficial consumerism of today.
There is also a clash between sort of the ideal of the city and the chaotic nature of the city. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes, because guidebooks, be it a guidebook to Rome in Italy or Lagos in Nigeria, guidebooks through the ages tend to present cities as a chaos, while at the same time presenting cities as an ideal structure, the crown of human achievements, and so on. But this is, I mean, and yes, cities are chaotic, big cities are chaotic, but this is really a rhetoric strategy of the guidebook, exactly to produce this image that the only thing that can make a traveler survive in a city is the guidebook.
So just finally, I just want to ask you what it was like, because you used this book to explore Rome for the study, and I'm wondering about that visceral experience of sort of walking into through the gaze of the Middle Ages, looking at Rome.
Yes, during the guidebook project, it was a collaborative project, and we all studied a guidebook from various periods. And we very often had these walking seminars when we took our guidebooks out on town and just tried to see what happens if we follow the advice of this guidebook. And it was magical, really, because then you see the city with new eyes again and again, depending on which guidebook you use, which eyes you are using. So nowadays, I always use only old guidebooks when I travel. So, because that is a way of traveling not only in place and space, but also in time. So that gives really another dimension to traveling and experiencing cities.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to me, Anna Blennow.
Thank you.